the first thing you learn in a hospital is that silence has a sound. It isn't quiet. It's oxygen hissing, souls squeaking, voices softened by curtains, and a heart monitor that refuses to let anyone forget time still moves. That steady beep followed me down the corridor, tapping out a rhythm I couldn't escape. When I pushed open my husband's door, the lights were dimmed to a twilight that didn't belong to any hour. Machines blinked in patient cycles. Tubes traced pale lines over his skin. He looked smaller than my memories would allow. My husband, the man who used to fill a room with certainty, now folded into white sheets, breathing shallow as if each inhale had to be negotiated. I forced my face into calm. In our family, composure was currency. Tears were for private places, and even then you wiped them away before they stained anything important. His eyes found mine immediately, too bright, too awake. He lifted a trembling hand and I crossed the room to take it. His palm was dry and hot at once. "Close the door," he whispered. I glanced back. The hallway was crowded with the people who had built their lives around his name. His mother with her rigid posture, his brother pretending to scroll through messages, my sister-in-law whispering to a cousin. I pushed the door until it clicked shut. The sound felt like a lock turning. My husband pulled me closer with a strength that didn't match the rest of him. "Listen," he said. It was an order, not a request. "I'm here," I whispered. "You don't have to talk." "I do." He swallowed, winced, then fixed his gaze on mine. "Before I go." My chest tightened. Part of me wanted to lie, to tell him everything would be okay, even if it was. Comfort has always been my reflex. But the look in his eyes warned me not to offer softness where he was trying to deliver something sharp. "There's something I have to tell you," he said. "And you have to promise me you won't say a word. Not yet." Promise? In this family, promises were never simple. They were vows, yes, but also leverage, the invisible strings that kept appearances neat and people obedient. "Why?" I asked. "Because once you know, you can't unknow it." His breathing hitched. The monitor beeped, steady, indifferent. "And once they know, they won't let you breathe." They, the pronoun landed like a warning shot. I looked at the door as if it might burst open. "Tell me," I said. He stared at the ceiling as if the truth was written there and he needed to read it correctly. Then he brought his eyes back to me and I saw it. Fear, not of dying, but of what dying would release. "I lied," he said. My mind tried to make the sentence smaller. Everyone lies. White lies, social lies, lies that keep the peace. But the way he said it turned the word into something heavy and ancient. "About what?" I asked. He squeezed my fingers once, an apology without asking permission to be forgiven. "About the legacy," he whispered. "About where it came from, about who we are." Outside the door, someone laughed softly, an absurd, normal sound that didn't belong in this room. Life on one side of a door, collapse on the other. "We are who we are," I said, trying to anchor myself. "You built." "I didn't build it." His voice sharpened, then cracked. "I took it." The air went thin. I saw our home in my mind, the land, the plaques, the framed newspaper articles, the dinner toasts where everyone spoke about our name like it was holy. "From who?" I managed. His eyes shone. "That's the part they buried," he said, "and that's the part they'll do anything to keep buried." Love versus deception. Comfort versus consequences. I had lived on the comfort side for so long I didn't know how to stand anywhere else. He lowered his voice until it was barely breath. "There's a file," he said, "in the study, behind my father's portrait." My father-in-law's portrait stared down from our wall, dignified, untouchable. I dusted the frame 1,000 times. I'd never once thought to look behind it. "You have to take it," he said, "before they do." My heart hammered. "Why me?" "Because they trust you least," he whispered, and the bitter irony almost made me laugh. I had spent years folding myself into their traditions, speaking their careful language, trying to earn a place at their table. And now my husband was telling me my outsider status was my only weapon. The door handle rattled. A voice called, "Is he awake? Can we come in?" My husband's eyes snapped to the door, then back to me. His grip tightened, urgent. "Promise me," he rasped. "Not yet, wait until after." A coughing fit cut him off, violent and wet, shaking his entire frame. The monitor quickened, beeping faster, scolding the room for letting time slip. I leaned in, panic rising. "After what?" I begged. He pulled me close with the last of his strength, mouth near my ear, and whispered a name I had never heard in my life. And when the door opened and the family flooded in, their faces changed the instant that name left his lips, like they'd been waiting years to hear it spoken aloud. If you'd asked me a month ago what my marriage was made of, I would have given you a list like a tour guide. Love, loyalty, hard work, tradition. I would have said the words the family taught me to say: legacy, honor, sacrifice, like they were stitched into my vows. Because from the outside, we were the kind of couple people pointed at in whispers that sounded like admiration. We had the house on the hill that overlooked the acreage, the long driveway lined with trees that turned gold in autumn, the company trucks with our last name painted on the doors. At church, at charity dinners, at the annual harvest festival, I watched strangers' eyes drift over my husband the way you look at something solid and dependable. He wore respect like a tailored coat. And I wore my part too, smiling, smoothing, pretending it never hurt. In our world, the legacy wasn't just business. It was land passed down like scripture. It was a family name spoken with a careful pause, as if saying it too quickly would cheapen it. It was reputation, quiet power that didn't have to raise its voice. When people asked what my husband did, they didn't just mean his job. They meant his place in the world, and by extension, mine. We hosted parties that looked effortless and felt like performance. I learned which forks went where, which stories were safe to laugh at, which questions were rude even when they were innocent. I learned to say we instead of I, because in a legacy family, individuality is a loose thread. Pull it too hard and the whole tapestry threatens to unravel. The elders sat at the head of every table, even when they weren't physically there. My husband's mother, elegant, sharp, always composed, treated emotions like stains, addressed them quickly, never in public. His father, even after retirement, still moved through the company like a shadow that owned every hallway. The siblings competed in polished ways. Who donated more, whose child got better grades, who was invited to sit closer to the founder at public events. Their smiles were bright, their eyes measuring. And my husband, he was the golden son, the steady hand, the one everyone trusted with the keys. I believed it, I believed him. That's the part that still stings, the way belief can feel like love when you're inside it. Our daily life was full of quiet rituals that made me feel safe. Coffee poured before sunrise, the same radio station. His jacket hung on the same hook. He'd kiss my temple as he passed, like a habit that proved I belonged. When he left for the office, he'd say, "I'll be home for dinner," and most nights he was. Predictability is a kind of kindness, and I mistook it for truth. But even kindness has seams. The first crack was small enough to ignore. A locked drawer in his desk that hadn't been locked before. I noticed it one afternoon while dusting, my hands just drifting the way they always did, maintaining the polish of our life. The key wasn't in its usual dish. I remember standing there with my cloth, staring at the tiny brass lock, telling myself I was being ridiculous. People deserve privacy. That's what I told myself as I walked away. The second crack came as a phone call he didn't want me to hear. He was in the kitchen, voice low, back turned. I caught only fragments. "Not now, she can't know. It's handled." When he realized I was there, he smiled too quickly. He asked about dinner like he hadn't been speaking in secrets. I wanted to press him, but I also wanted to keep the peace. In our family, peace was currency, and I spent it to avoid uncomfortable truths. There were other moments, like dust motes you see only when the light hits at the right angle. A missing document in a folder marked with the family crest. An unfamiliar name on a holiday card he snatched before I could read. The way his mother's face tightened whenever someone mentioned the old days, as if history had sharp edges. Sometimes, at night, I'd catch him staring at the ceiling as if sleep was something he owed but couldn't afford. I'd reach for him, and he'd pull me close, pressing his forehead to mine like he was anchoring himself. "We're lucky," I'd whisper. He'd answer, "We are," but the words sounded practiced. Still, I kept building my part of the story. I attended board dinners and smiled at jokes that weren't funny. I managed the family calendar like a diplomat. I learned to redirect conversations before they became arguments, to smooth over tension before it became scandal. I told myself that this was strength, being the calm center, the bridge, the one who could hold everyone together. Because when you're surrounded by people who treat legacy like a crown, you start believing the crown is heavy enough to justify anything. My husband and I would walk the land on Sundays. The fields rolled out behind our property like a promise. He'd point to a fence line and talk about expansion, about keeping things in the family. He'd squeeze my hand and say, "This will be ours to pass on." The way he said ours made me feel chosen. But there was always a shadow at the edge of his certainty. A flicker in his eyes when the conversation drifted too close to origins. How the company began, how the land was acquired, why certain relatives were never invited to reunions. If I asked, he'd deflect with charm or fatigue. "It was complicated," he'd say. "It's been settled." Settled, another family word. It meant, don't dig. I didn't dig, I built. Until the day the hospital called. It was an ordinary morning, the kind I'd trusted for years. I was making coffee, humming without realizing it, when my phone rang and a stranger's voice asked if I was his wife. In a breath, the foundation of our routine turned to sand. I remember my hands shaking as I grabbed my keys, the way the world outside looked too bright for bad news. And when I walked into that dim room, the machines, the tubes, the slow breath of a man who had always seemed unbreakable, I understood something I'd avoided for years. A legacy can look perfect for a long time, right up until it doesn't. Because a hospital doesn't care about reputation. It doesn't care about family names or land deeds or whose portrait hangs in the study. It reduces everything to flesh, breath, and truth. And as I stood beside my husband's bed, watching him gather his strength to speak, I felt the perfect family story tighten around my throat. It was about to snap. They flowed into the room like concern, until you looked closer and saw the accounting behind their eyes. My mother-in-law went straight to his bedside, perfume and composure first. His brother hovered near the monitors as if numbers could explain what a face refused to say. Someone squeezed my shoulder like I was furniture that needed straightening. And all I could hear was the name my husband had whispered, still ringing in my skull. I smiled because my body knew the rules even when my mind didn't. I said he was tired. I said the doctor wanted quiet. I kept my voice smooth so no one would notice how sharp the truth felt against my teeth. My husband lay still while they spoke over him, about prayers, about strength, about how this family always gets through. He looked past them to me, and what I saw in his expression wasn't only fear or regret. It was permission, like he'd handed me something explosive and was waiting to see what I'd do with it. When the nurse finally nudged everyone out, the room emptied in reluctant steps. My mother-in-law kissed his forehead, careful not to smudge her lipstick. His brother murmured, "We'll handle everything," as if grief was a project plan. Then the door shut again. "You saw their faces," he whispered. I swallowed hard. "What is this?" My voice came out thin. "Who is that name? Why did they look like they'd seen a ghost?" He stared at the ceiling, gathering strength. "Because the story isn't the story," he said, "and they've been guarding the real one longer than you've been in this house." I leaned closer, furious and afraid. "Tell me all of it." He flinched, not at me, but at the weight. "It started before you," he said. "Before me, even. The land, the company, everyone says it was earned. It was." Greed versus integrity flashed through my mind like a warning light. Our comfort suddenly looked like it had fingerprints on it. "My father made a deal," he continued. "Then he broke it. He took what wasn't his, and because he did it with paperwork, people pretended it wasn't violence." I tried to picture my father-in-law's polished hands doing something ugly. It didn't fit. That was the point, I realized. The prettiest lies match the furniture. "There was an inheritance," my husband said. "A will that named someone outside the main line, someone they erased." My stomach rolled. "So we stole it." "They stole it," he corrected, then his mouth tightened. "I kept it." The distinction mattered to him. It was the thin excuse he'd used to keep calling himself a good man. They did it. He benefited. Loyalty versus self-preservation, and he'd chosen his own survival every day he stayed quiet. "The name," I said, barely breathing. "That person is." "A daughter," he whispered. "My father's, not with my mother." The room went cold. My mother-in-law's rigid smile in the hallway made horrible sense now. This wasn't just a family. It was a fortress. "She exists?" I asked. He nodded once. "She was sent away, paid off. And when the will was written, it named her and her mother. It would have split everything." "So they changed it," I said. He closed his eyes. "They forged it." Forged, not complicated, not settled, criminal, deliberate. "And you knew." My voice shook with anger that tasted like nausea. "I found out when I was 22, he said. "When they started handing me responsibility, when I was starving to prove I deserved it. My father brought me into the study and showed me the safe. He told me the truth like an initiation." He opened his eyes again, shame swimming there. He said, "This is what it takes to protect what's ours." I heard it in my head, in my father-in-law's calm voice, a sentence that could justify anything. "You could have walked away," I whispered. He let out one bitter breath. "And be nobody. Lose my place, lose my mother's respect, lose everything I'd been raised to worship." I told myself I was choosing family. Really, I was choosing comfort. Comfort versus consequences. The contrast that had built my life now threatened to crush it. He shifted, wincing. "When I met you, I thought maybe I could outrun it," he said. "Build something good enough that the rot underneath wouldn't matter." "That's not how rot works," I said. "It spreads." He nodded like he'd learned the same lesson too late. "I tried to make it right," he whispered. "I tried to find her." My breath caught. "You did." "Yes." His eyes slid away. "Quietly, I hired someone, I made calls from burner phones, I followed old leads. The locked drawer, the hush-hush calls, the missing papers. My ignored cracks snapped into a single line. "I found her," he said. "And?" "She didn't want money," he whispered. "She wanted answers. She wanted the truth spoken out loud." "And you didn't give it," I said. "I tried," he insisted, and desperation broke through the weakness. "But my father found out. He threatened her. He threatened me. He said if I pulled that thread, the whole family would hang." "And you listened." "I chose the easier sin," he admitted. The monitor beeped, steady and indifferent, like it was counting down the seconds he had left to manage the damage. "There's more," he said, and something in his tone tightened my skin. "Because it wasn't just papers." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" He stared at our joined hands as if he couldn't bear my face. "There was an accident," he whispered. "The night everything got finalized." My mouth went dry. "What accident?" "The woman," he said. "Her mother, she came to the property furious. She said she'd go to the police, the papers, anyone who would listen. She wanted what was promised." My pulse hammered. "And your father?" "He met her by the barn," my husband whispered. "They argued, she fell. She hit her head. It was a bad fall." I searched his eyes. "Was it an accident?" He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. He let silence do the violence, like a blade sliding between ribs. "She died," I breathed. He shut his eyes. "Yes." The room shrank until there was only the bed, the beep, and the truth pressing on my lungs. Legacy, land, reputation. Suddenly they looked like trophies stolen from a crime scene. "And the daughter?" I asked, voice trembling. "She lost her mother because your father." "Because of what we kept." He corrected softly. I pulled my hand back as if his touch burned. "Don't say we, I didn't know." His eyes opened, pleading. "But you benefited," he said, and the sentence landed like another betrayal, aimed at making me share the stain so he didn't have to carry it alone. That's when I understood. This confession wasn't only guilt. It was a transfer. He was bleeding out, and he wanted to make sure I bled with him. "You're doing this now," I said, voice low, "because you want control after you're gone." His silence was agreement. I'm trying to protect you, he whispered. No, I said. You're trying to control the fallout. You're choosing who gets hurt and when. His jaw tightened. If they find out the wrong way, they'll destroy you, he said. They'll say you manipulated me, stole from them. They'll turn you into the villain so they can stay the heroes. Fear iced my anger because I believed him. I had seen their faces change at one whispered name. There's proof, he said. Documents, originals, everything they buried. It's in the file behind the portrait. And what do you want from me? I asked, though dread already answered. He held my gaze, breath shallow. Promise you won't say anything until I'm gone, he whispered. Promise you'll take the file before they do. Promise you'll decide what truth to tell, because if you don't, they will. A promise felt like a chain. Breaking it felt like death. Promise, he repeated, urgent. And in that dim room, with the perfect family waiting outside the door and the real one waiting in the dark of history, I realized I didn't know which choice would save me. I only knew that whatever I promised him next would become my new inheritance. He watched me the way a man watches the edge of a cliff, like he already knew the fall was coming and needed to decide what to push off first. My pulse thudded in my ears. The confession sat between us like a third body on the bed, heavy, undeniable, stealing the air. I wanted to stand up, to run to the sink and splash my face, to step outside and let the hallway noise remind me this was real life and not some nightmare my brain had invented. But my husband's fingers curled around mine again, stubborn, anchoring me to him. Promise me, he said, voice rough. I stared at his hand, bones, veins, the wedding ring that suddenly felt like a counterfeit symbol. Love versus truth, marriage versus morality. I had always believed those things were supposed to align. Now they split like a crack running through concrete. What exactly are you asking? I whispered. His breath shook. Don't tell them until after I'm gone. The words struck me with a strange, cold clarity. Of course, that's what he wanted. He wanted to leave this world without facing the fire he lit. He wanted his funeral to stay clean, his portrait to keep smiling. You want to die with your image intact, I said, and my voice surprised me, sharp, almost cruel. His eyes filled. I want to die with you alive, he said. If you speak now, they'll crush you, they'll call you hysterical, they'll say I wasn't in my right mind, they'll bury it again and bury you with it. I hated that he was probably right. I hated even more that he was using that fear to steer me. And what about her? I asked, the name he'd whispered still a shard in my mind. What about the daughter you said they erased? His gaze flickered, pain and calculation tangling together. Give this to her first, he said. What is this? My voice cracked. His hand trembled as he reached under the blanket. For a second, I thought he was reaching for comfort, for my hand again, for forgiveness. Instead, he pulled out a small object from the folds of the sheet, something he'd kept hidden like contraband. A key. Not a house key, not a car key. A tiny brass key with a stamped number on it, the kind you get from a safe deposit box or a private lock that doesn't want to be noticed. My stomach tightened. How long have you had that? His throat worked as he swallowed. Long enough, he said. It opens the box. The evidence is inside. Evidence. The word made everything real in a way emotion hadn't. Feelings can be argued with. Evidence can't. He pressed the key into my palm. It was warm from his skin. It felt heavier than it should have. And if I do? I asked, my voice barely there. His eyes held mine. Then you become one of them, he said softly. You become the kind of person who knows the truth and still chooses the lie because it's easier. Greed versus integrity. Loyalty versus self-preservation. It wasn't just his confession anymore. It was a test he was handing me with his dying hands. My fingers closed around the key, but my mind resisted. You're asking me to protect the family that did this, I said. To protect the people who forged wills and erased a child and covered up. I couldn't say murder out loud. The word felt like poison. I'm asking you to protect yourself, he insisted. And I'm asking you to protect the ones who don't deserve to drown for what my father did. I laughed once, short and empty. Like your mother, like your brother, they're not innocent. His face tightened. Not everyone is the same, he said, and you know it. Did I? Or had I spent years pretending they were all good because it was easier than seeing the rot? His breathing grew shallower. The monitor beeped steadily, as if it could keep him here through sheer routine. He swallowed again, eyes glassy now, and reached under the pillow. This time, he pulled out a folded envelope. My name was written on the front in his handwriting. It looked ordinary. That was the terrifying part, how something that could ruin lives could still look like a simple letter. Read it after, he whispered. After what? After I'm gone, he said again, stubborn, as if repeating it could make it right. I stared at the envelope. The weight in my hands multiplied, key in one palm, letter in the other. The proof of betrayal wrapped in paper so polite it made my skin crawl. Why not now? I asked. Why wait? His eyes shimmered. Because if you read it now, you'll show it on your face, he said. And they'll know they watch you. They've always watched you. A chill crawled up my spine. It wasn't paranoia, it was pattern. The family had always been a stage. I just never realized the audience was hostile. He coughed, a harsh, rattling sound that made me flinch. When it passed, he looked more fragile, more hollowed out, like the confession was draining what little time he had left. There's one more thing, he rasped. My chest tightened. What? His gaze searched mine, raw now. If it gets too dangerous, he whispered, burn it. I stared. Burn the evidence. Burn the letter, he said. Burn the file, burn everything. I felt sick. That's not justice, I said. That's you trying to erase it again. It's survival, he whispered. If they corner you, if they threaten you, if you have to choose between truth and living, choose living. Love versus truth became something uglier in that moment. It wasn't a poetic dilemma. It was a trap. If I exposed him, I shattered the family and likely myself. If I stayed quiet, I became his accomplice, the keeper of a lie soaked in someone else's blood. My hands shook. You're asking me to carry your sin, I said. His eyes filled with tears he didn't bother to hide. I'm asking you to carry our reality, he whispered, because I can't. Silence hung between us, thick as fog. Outside, footsteps moved past the door, voices low, a nurse's soft laugh. Life kept going. The world refused to pause for my moral crisis. I don't know if I can, I admitted. His grip tightened, startlingly strong. You can, he said, because you've always been the one who holds everything together. You've always been the one who keeps the peace. The peace, the role, the cage. My throat burned. I kept the peace because I thought it was love, I whispered. His gaze softened, and for the first time since I'd entered, he looked like the man I married, tired, flawed human. Then let it be love now, he said. Love that tells the truth to the right person first. Love that doesn't get you killed. Killed? The word landed like ice. He saw my reaction and nodded as if confirming what he'd feared all along. Promise me, he said again, voice fatting. Wait, take the key, read the letter later, give it to her first, and if you must, burn it. I stared down at the key, the envelope. I wanted to throw them across the room. I wanted to press them to my chest like armor. I wanted to rewind time to the version of my life where a locked drawer was the biggest mystery I had. Instead, I nodded. Once small, because my body understood danger even if my heart didn't. I promise, I whispered. Relief flickered across his face, almost childlike. He exhaled, long and shaking. And in that breath, I felt the shift, the way control moves from one set of hands to another. His eyelids fluttered. He looked past me, toward the door, as if he could already hear them gathering like a tide. And then his grip loosened. Not dramatically, not like movies, just a slow release, as if the last strength holding him to this world finally gave up. The monitor beeped on, stubborn, but his chest didn't rise the same way. My breath caught. No, I whispered, leaning closer. Please. The door opened. They poured in mother, brother, cousins, nurses. Faces arranged for grief, for pity, for the performance of loss. but I wasn't holding only his hand anymore. I was holding the key to an earthquake. Grief is supposed to make you honest. It did the opposite to me. It made me an actress. On the morning of the funeral, I dressed in black the way our family expected. Neat, dignified, expensive without looking like I'd tried. My hands moved automatically, pinning my hair, smoothing fabric, while I stared into the mirror and tried to find the wife I'd been before the hospital beep turned into a flat line. All I found was a woman carrying a key in her pocket like a weapon. The church was full before I arrived. People stood in clusters, heads bowed, voices hushed, as if lowering their volume could lower the truth. The front pew was reserved for the family, which in their language meant the bloodline first and everyone else second. I was seated at the center anyway. Hood is a title they can use when it suits the story. My mother-in-law took my arm, her grip steady, her eyes dry. "Hold yourself," she murmured. "People are watching." They always were. That was the point of legacy, to live like you were on display and call it honor. The casket sat at the front like a polished promise. Flowers spilled around it in white and green, purity arranged by hands that didn't know what the family had done to keep its name clean. I wondered if the erased daughter was somewhere in this crowd, unseen, listening to strangers praise the life built on her silence. The service began with music that sounded like surrender. Then the eulogies came, one after another, each person stepping up to perform grief in a way that matched the family brand. My husband's brother spoke first. He talked about dedication, about sacrifice, about how my husband carried responsibility like a gift. The audience murmured approval at the right places, and I learned something new about grief. It can have applause. My mother-in-law followed, her voice controlled. She told a story about my husband as a little boy, already serious, already loyal. She called him the bridge between generations, the one who would carry the torch. Her eyes glossed once, and even that looked measured. Image versus reality. Public praise versus private panic. I sat with my hands folded, nodding softly, while inside me the confession screamed. I could feel the envelope against my ribs, tucked into the inner pocket of my coat. I could feel the key's edges pressing into my thigh. Evidence, hidden in plain sight, like the family's worst habits. When it was my turn, I stood because my legs remembered how. I walked to the front, the room blurring at the edges, and faced a sea of sympathetic faces. They wanted the widow's pain, the clean narrative, the simple ending. My husband, I began, and my voice sounded like someone else, believed in taking care of people. The sentence was true. It was also incomplete, and the incompleteness tasted like rust. I told safe stories. His laugh when he was relaxed, his patience with children, the way he brought home stray dogs and pretended it was an accident. The room softened. People smiled through tears. Behind them, stained glass saints watched without comment. I kept it brief, because if I spoke too long, the truth might crawl out between syllables. When I sat back down, my mother-in-law squeezed my hand. "Beautiful," she whispered. "Exactly." Exactly. The word chilled me. Exactly what? Exactly the lie. After the service, the receiving line formed like a ritual. One by one, people pressed my hands, offered condolences, and promised the legacy would continue, as if legacy were a living thing that needed feeding. I nodded, thanked them, and swallowed panic like it was etiquette. Then I noticed the looks. Not from strangers, their pity was easy, from the family. My brother-in-law watched me over shoulders, eyes narrowed as if grief had turned him into a detective. A cousin whispered to another and glanced at my pocket, then away. My mother-in-law's posture shifted, alert, like she sensed smoke before flame. They could tell I was off. They knew my performance didn't match their script. I tried to correct it. I softened my face. I let my shoulders slump at the right times. I stared at the casket a second longer than necessary. I even allowed a tear to fall, not for them, but because the pressure inside me needed somewhere to go. Still, suspicion clung to the air. My heart kept tapping the same beat as the organ music, only faster. If anyone hugged me too hard, I feared the envelope would crinkle. confessing for me right then. Halfway through the line, a man in a dark suit approached, not wearing the expression of a mourner, but the expression of someone who had appointments. He waited until the person in front of me moved on, then stepped in close enough that his voice wouldn't carry. "Mrs. Hale?" he asked. I blinked. The name sounded wrong on his tongue. "Yes." He handed me a card. "I'm Mr. Danner. I represent your husband's estate." Estate. The word turned death into paperwork. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said, and his eyes flicked to my coat pocket before returning to my face. "Your husband mentioned he left certain documents for you." My throat tightened instantly. The key, the letter, the file behind the portrait. "He did?" I asked, forcing calm. Mr. Danner's smile didn't reach his eyes. "He said you would know where they are. We'll need them soon, before the week is out." Need, not when you're ready, soon. I glanced past him and saw my brother-in-law's gaze lock onto us. Saw my mother-in-law angle closer, pretending not to. The room felt smaller, as if the walls had moved in to listen. "What documents?" I asked, buying time. "A set of originals," Mr. Danner said. "Titles, trust papers, a memorandum. He said they were sensitive." Sensitive, another family word. It meant dangerous. My fingers went numb. "I'll look," I managed. He nodded once. "Please do. And Mrs. Hale," he lowered his voice, "it's important those documents don't go missing. There are parties who would benefit if they did." Parties, plural. Not just the family, then. Whoever else circled this legacy could smell opportunity now. Mr. Danner stepped away into the crowd as if he'd merely offered condolences. But the damage was done. The family had noticed. The lawyer had flagged me. The trap had been set in motion. The last guest finally drifted out, and the church emptied of strangers, leaving only the people who truly mattered, the ones who had something to lose. My mother-in-law approached, her face soft for the audience, hard for me. "The lawyer spoke to you," she said lightly. "Yes," I answered. "And," her smile stayed in place, her eyes didn't. I felt the key bite my pocket. Love versus truth, safety versus danger. I could almost hear my husband's last instruction, "Not yet." "He just offered his condolences," I lied. My mother-in-law held my gaze a beat too long, then patted my arm. "Of course," she said. "We'll discuss everything soon. We have arrangements." Arrangements. Wills, assets, signatures. The machinery that turns a dead man into a divided fortune. As we walked out into the cold air, black coats moving like a single organism, I understood with sick certainty. The funeral had been the curtain call for the story they wanted told. Now the real play was about to begin. They called it a family meeting, but it felt like a trial. 2 days after the funeral, the house filled again, only this time no one brought casseroles or spoke softly about memories. They brought tension. They brought questions sharpened into weapons. They brought the kind of grief that doesn't cry, it calculates. My mother-in-law insisted we meet in the study. Of course she did. The study was the family's altar. Dark wood, leather chairs, framed photos of men who looked proud in identical ways. And on the wall, watching all of us like a judge, hung my father-in-law's portrait. I couldn't look at it for long. Because behind that painted smile, according to my husband's last breath, was the proof that could unravel everything. I arrived early, pretending I wanted quiet. In reality, I needed a moment alone with the portrait, a moment to decide if I was brave enough to reach behind it. But the house was never truly alone. Staff moved quietly in distant rooms. Footsteps creaked above. The family had eyes everywhere, even in silence. So I sat, hands clasped, back straight, widow mask on. The lawyer arrived last, a leather folder tucked under his arm like a shield. Mr. Danner greeted everyone with the same polite sympathy, though I could see his focus sharpening as he took in faces, body language, alliances. My brother-in-law sat closest to him. My mother-in-law took the chair at the head of the room as if death hadn't changed hierarchy. 2 cousins and an aunt positioned themselves along the couch like spectators with opinions. My husband's younger sister hovered near the doorway, arms folded tight, eyes red, not with grief, but with fury she didn't know where to place. And me, centered, isolated, and watched. "Thank you for coming," Mr. Danner began. "I know this is a difficult time." No one answered. Difficulty wasn't the problem, division was. He opened the folder and removed papers with slow care. Every sound seemed amplified. The slide of paper, the click of his pen, the faint tick of the antique clock on the mantel. "We are here to review the last will and testament of your husband," he said, glancing at me, "and the associated trust documents." My mother-in-law's chin lifted. "Proceed." Mr. Danner cleared his throat. "Your husband left specific instructions regarding the distribution of personal property, liquid assets, and, most importantly, the family holdings." The word holdings landed like a bell. Everyone sat a fraction straighter. He began with smaller items, sentimental bequests meant to soften the room. A watch to his brother, a set of cufflinks to his father, a charity donation in his name that made my mother-in-law nod, pleased. Then he reached the section that mattered. I felt the key in my pocket like it had grown heavier. "Under the terms of the trust," Mr. Danner said, "the operational control of Hale Agricultural and the associated land remains within the family structure, subject to certain conditions." My brother-in-law exhaled like he'd been holding his breath. My mother-in-law's shoulders relaxed slightly. The cousins exchanged quick looks. The old story was still intact. The crown still sat on the right head. Then Mr. Danner continued. "However," he said, and the room tightened again, "your husband added an amendment shortly before his passing." My mother-in-law's eyes sharpened. "Amendment?" "Yes," Mr. Danner said calmly. "It was signed and notarized." My brother-in-law leaned forward. "When was this signed?" Mr. Danner glanced down. 3 days before his death." 3 days. That meant after the confession. After he gave me the key and the letter. After he turned truth into a time bomb. My brother-in-law's gaze snapped to me. "He was medicated," he said quickly. "He was barely." "He was deemed competent," Mr. Danner interrupted, voice firm. "His physician signed the capacity statement. This amendment is valid." Greed versus grief. The grief in the room didn't disappear. It transformed into a hunger for control. Mr. Danner read on. "The amendment creates a conditional beneficiary." The words fell into the room like a dropped knife. My mother-in-law's voice went dangerously soft. "A what?" "A conditional beneficiary," he repeated. "A person who receives a designated portion of the estate if certain conditions are met." My husband's sister whispered, "Who?" Mr. Danner's eyes flicked to me again, just a fraction. It wasn't sympathy. It was warning. He read the name aloud. The same name my husband had whispered at the edge of death. The room didn't just react. It changed. My mother-in-law's face drained of color so fast it looked like someone had erased her. My brother-in-law made a sound, half laugh, half choke, like disbelief was trying to protect him. The cousins froze, eyes darting, suddenly hungry for scandal. And me, I felt heat flood my skin, not because I was shocked, because I was surrounded by people who had just been caught. "No," my mother-in-law said, voice cracking for the first time since the hospital. "That is not." "It is," Mr. Danner said, "and it is documented." My brother-in-law stood abruptly, chair scraping. "This is a joke," he snapped. "This is manipulation. Who did this?" His gaze landed on me like a slap. I held it steady, though my hands had gone cold. "Sit down," I said quietly. "How dare you?" he hissed. "He was dying, you were with him, you had access." "Enough," my mother-in-law cut in, but her voice trembled despite her control. "Mr. Danner, explain exactly what this amendment does." Mr. Danner adjusted his glasses. "Under the amendment, the conditional beneficiary will receive a fixed payment of $5 million, drawn from liquid assets and the sale of a non-operational parcel of land." 5 million. The number hit like an explosion. It wasn't just money. It was the symbolic fracture of everything they believed was untouchable. My husband's sister gasped. One cousin whispered, 5 million, like it was a crime on its own. My brother-in-law laughed again, sharp and ugly. Absolutely not, he said. That land has been in the family for generations, my mother-in-law finished, voice steadying as anger replaced shock. It cannot be sold. Then the condition becomes relevant, Mr. Danner said. All eyes snapped back to him. He read carefully. If the family contests the amendment, initiates legal action against the conditional beneficiary, or attempts to interfere with the distribution, the amount doubles. Silence. Not mourning silence, predator silence. 10 million. The cousins' faces flickered with competing emotions. Outrage, curiosity, greed. My mother-in-law's jaw clenched so hard I thought it might crack. My brother-in-law's eyes burned, locked on me like I was the match that lit this. This is extortion, he said. This is your brother's instruction, Mr. Danner corrected. It is designed as a deterrent. A deterrent, a trap. My husband had built a trap even in death. My husband's sister looked from face to face, confusion and heartbreak mixing. Who is she? She asked, voice small. Why would he do this? My mother-in-law didn't answer. She couldn't, not without admitting what she'd spent her life burying. Instead, she turned to me. Did you know about this? She asked. The room leaned toward my response like it was a verdict. Love versus truth again, but sharper now. If I said yes, they would destroy me. If I said no, I would be lying on top of a truth that was already cracking the floor. I knew he was worried, I said carefully. He said there were documents. He said there were things he wanted handled properly. My brother-in-law scoffed. Properly, he repeated. You mean by you. Mr. Danner lifted another page. There is more, he said. My stomach tightened. More. How much had my husband arranged? How much had he decided to hand me like a burden? The amendment also includes a restriction, Mr. Danner continued. The conditional beneficiary is to receive the payment directly, without interference, and with a private meeting facilitated by Mrs. Hale. Mrs. Hale. Me. My brother-in-law's face darkened. There it is, he said, pointing at me like I'd been exposed. He put her in charge. Why? Because she fed him this story, because she played him. I did not, I said, sharper now. Then why you? He demanded. Why not mother, why not me? Because he didn't trust you, I thought. Because he knew exactly what you were capable of. Because he knew you. Bury it again. But I couldn't say that. Not yet. Not without lighting myself on fire. My mother-in-law stood slowly. This meeting is over, she said. Mr. Danner didn't move. Legally, it is not, he said. You are all required to acknowledge receipt of the will's contents and sign. My mother-in-law turned her gaze on him, a look that had probably ended arguments and careers. We will sign, she said, after we speak privately. You can speak privately, Mr. Danner replied evenly, but the documents stand. My brother-in-law leaned toward me, voice low and venomous. What did you do to him in that hospital room? He whispered. What did you promise? The words hit deeper than he knew. I had promised. I had promised things I wasn't sure I could survive keeping. I met his eyes. I promised to honor his wishes, I said. He smiled without warmth. Then you're the one who'll pay for them. The cousins began whispering, little sparks of rumor catching fire. My husband's sister looked like she might vomit. My mother-in-law's hands shook once before she curled them into fists and forced stillness back into her body. I felt suddenly, terrifyingly alone, not because my husband was gone, but because the family had decided I was the easiest target. The will reading hadn't brought closure. It had drawn blood. And as Mr. Danner slid the signature pages across the table, I realized something that made my skin go cold. The truth my husband confessed might not protect me. It might destroy me first. The house looked the same after the will reading, but it didn't feel like mine anymore. Every hallway seemed wired with ears. Every polished surface reflected a woman I didn't recognize, someone cautious, someone hunted, someone carrying a tiny brass key like it could either save her or bury her. That night, I waited until the last light in my mother-in-law's wing went out. When the house finally settled, I slipped into the study and closed the door with a softness that felt like guilt. The portrait watched me. My father-in-law's painted eyes followed as I crossed the room. I told myself I was doing this for truth, for the woman and child erased from our story. But another part of me, smaller, ashamed, was doing it for survival. Because if the family decided I was the villain, I needed something sharper than my word. I reached behind the frame and felt a thin seam. My fingers found a latch I'd never known existed. It clicked open like a secret exhaling. A narrow compartment slid forward, and inside was a folder wrapped in plastic, sealed as if it had been waiting for fire. I pulled it out and set it on the desk. My hands shook as I peeled the plastic away. The folder was thick, heavier than paper should be, and the first thing I saw was my husband's handwriting on a sticky note, read in order. Of course, even dead, he wanted to direct the scene. The first document was a copy of the amended trust, the same language Mr. Danner had read, except here my husband had underlined certain lines in red. Conditional, doubles, facilitated by Mrs. Hale. He'd boxed my name as if it was a move on a chessboard. Behind it was a bank statement with an account number highlighted. There was a note beside it, box key OPNS 1147. DANNER, have this. I stared at the line until it blurred. He told me I needed to move first. It wasn't just confession, it was strategy. I flipped to the next page and froze. A deed, or what looked like one. The land parcel listed wasn't the non-operational plot Mr. Danner mentioned. It was a section of the original acreage, the heart of the property, the part the family bragged about at every fundraiser. And the names on it weren't the names everyone knew. 2 unfamiliar signatures sat at the bottom, written in ink that looked older than my marriage. This wasn't a mistake. This was the first crack made visible. I kept turning pages, forcing myself to follow his order. There were photos next, grainy, printed, the kind taken before everything became digital and easy to erase. One showed a young woman standing near the barn, hair blowing across her face, eyes narrowed against the sun. Someone had circled her in pen. Another showed a baby on someone's hip, a child's hand gripping a necklace. The necklace looked familiar, because I'd seen my mother-in-law wear a matching one to church. The next envelope was sealed. On the front, in my husband's handwriting, for her. My palms went slick. Her could only mean the conditional beneficiary. He wanted me to deliver something, not just money. I set it aside, unwilling to open what wasn't meant for me, and continued. A printed email chain followed, messages between my husband and someone named Cal Berriman. The subject line, Field Survey/Title History. Cal wrote about discrepancies, missing filings, irregular notarizations. My husband replied late at night, asking what it would take to prove an original deed existed. So he hadn't just discovered the rot. He'd been excavating it. Then came a medical capacity statement, signed by a physician, dated the day before the amendment. My husband had anticipated the family's argument and prepared for it like a man building a bunker. But the last item wasn't paperwork. It was a small black USB drive taped to a note. If they come for you, play this first. I stared at that sentence, the words digging into me. He had known his family would come for me, and still he chose to hand me the match. I slid the folder back into the compartment, keeping only what I could hide. The USB, the deed copy, and the sealed envelope marked for her. Then I returned the portrait to its perfect angle, as if nothing had happened. As I left the study, my chest tight, I realized the first door he never let me open wasn't the safe deposit box. It was him. The next morning, I drove to the bank alone. Inside, the bank smelled like carpet and caution. A clerk led me to a private room after I showed my ID and the key. She brought out a metal box stamped 1147 and placed it on the table like a verdict. When she left, I opened it. The first thing inside was an old photo album, worn at the corners, the kind you'd expect from an attic, not a vault. I opened it and found years arranged in glue and handwriting. Family gatherings, Holidays. A younger version of my husband beside his brother. My mother-in-law holding a toddler, smiling with a softness I'd rarely seen. Then I found the missing picture. A rectangular shadow where a photo had once been, the paper beneath torn cleanly away. The caption remained, written in neat cursive, Summer '92 at the barn with L. Just a letter, L a placeholder where a name had been ripped out. Under the album were more papers, a handwritten ledger with dates and amounts, payments made under a name I didn't recognize, a notarized letter from a woman stating she'd been promised a settlement, and tucked at the bottom, a slim folder labeled accident. Fear versus courage. I opened it anyway. Inside were drafts, notes, a rough map of the property with a circle near the barn, and a typed statement describing a heated argument, a fall, and a decision to handle it privately. Handle it privately. My husband had told me there was an accident, and my mind had tried to soften it. But these pages didn't soften. They sharpened. And then I saw something that turned my blood colder than any crime. At the top of one page was my husband's signature. Not as an innocent witness. As a participant, acknowledging what happened, agreeing to silence, protecting the legacy. So his confession wasn't a complete surrender. It was a controlled release, enough to implicate his father, enough to set conditions, but not enough to show the full shape of his own hands. I sat back, dizzy, loyalty versus self-preservation. He had been loyal to the family first, even as he confessed to me. And now, in death, he was trying to make my loyalty his last defense. I thought of his last request, wait, deliver, burn if necessary, and felt the trap tighten. If I exposed his father, I exposed him. If I protected him, I betrayed a dead woman and a living daughter. Either way, the family would point at me and call it devotion or treason. In the end, I'd pay. When the clerk returned, I slid everything back into the box except the album. The documents were knives. The photos were ghosts. I left the bank with the album under my arm and the USB hidden in my purse, my heart pounding. Halfway to the car, my phone vibrated. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Then I thought of the will, the condition, the letter marked for her. I answered. Mrs. Hale, a woman's voice said, calm and tired, like she'd spent years waiting. You don't know me, but I know you. My grip tightened on the phone. Who is this? A pause, then she spoke the name my husband had whispered, except she said it like it belonged to her, like she'd carried it through fire. It's me, she said, and I think your husband lied to you about what really happened. I didn't go home after that phone call. I drove past the turn for our house and kept going until the road widened into open fields, until I could breathe without feeling like the walls were listening. I pulled over near a ditch lined with winter grass and sat there with my hands gripping the steering wheel, knuckles white, phone pressed to my ear. Her voice still echoed in my head, steady, exhausted, certain. I think your husband lied to you about what really happened. The sentence cracked open a new layer of fear. I had spent the last 48 hours believing the truth was a weapon I could learn to hold. Now I realized the weapon might be loaded with someone else's bullets. Tell me, I'd said into the phone, my voice too tight. She didn't, not fully. She gave me enough to destabilize me and then told me quietly, you're not safe in that house. She said the family had always had ways of making problems disappear, papers, people, reputations. She told me to meet her somewhere public, somewhere neutral, and when I asked why she trusted me at all, she answered, because you're the only one who didn't grow up learning how to lie about it. Then she hung up. And I sat in my car with an old photo album on the passenger seat and a USB drive burning a hole through my purse, trying to decide whether my husband had died confessing or died setting me up. By the time I finally returned, the house was already a storm. Cars lined the drive, black sedans, familiar SUVs, even the company truck with the logo on the side, as if the business needed to witness the family drama. Lights glowed in the downstairs windows. Voices leaked through the walls the moment I stepped onto the porch, sharp enough to cut skin. I walked in, and the air hit me like heat. The study door was open. Everyone was inside. My mother-in-law stood at the head of the room, not sitting. She never sat when she wanted control. My brother-in-law paced like a caged animal. Two cousins sat on the couch, phones in hand, eyes hungry. My husband's sister was by the window, arms wrapped around herself, face tight with anger and grief. And Mr. Danner, the lawyer, sat in one of the leather chairs, expression neutral, as if this was just another Tuesday of other people's lives collapsing. When I stepped into the doorway, every voice stopped at once. That silence wasn't respect. It was target acquisition. "There she is," my brother-in-law said, and the way he said it made my skin crawl. "The widow with the key." My mother-in-law's gaze pinned me. "Where were you?" she asked. "Out," I answered, keeping my voice steady. "I needed air." "Air," one cousin echoed with a small laugh. "Or time to hide things." I didn't flinch. I couldn't afford to. Mr. Danner cleared his throat. "Mrs. Hale, thank you for joining us. The family has concerns." Concerns. Like I was a loose wire in a chandelier, threatening their dinner party. My brother-in-law cut in. "We want to know what my brother gave you in that hospital room," he said. "We want to know what you found, and we want to know who told him to put that stranger in the will." Stranger. The word was a slap. They could erase someone with language and pretend it was moral. "She's not a stranger," my husband's sister said suddenly, voice shaking. "If she's named, she's someone." My mother-in-law's head snapped toward her. "Enough," she warned. But the sister didn't back down. Her eyes shone. "What aren't you telling us?" she demanded. "Because you knew that name, Mother. I saw your face." My mother-in-law's lips thinned. "I know many names," she said coldly. "That doesn't mean they belong in our affairs." Our affairs, not truth, not justice, affairs. Like this was gossip to manage. My brother-in-law pointed at me. "Tell them," he said. "Tell them what you've been doing. He was weak. You had him alone. You could have put anything in front of him and he would have signed it." My stomach clenched. There it was, the story they wanted. Not that their legacy was compromised, but that I, the outsider, had manipulated the golden son at his lowest. "I didn't force him to do anything," I said. "But you benefited," my mother-in-law said softly, and her tone was worse than shouting. "You sit in this house. You wear our name. You stand at funerals accepting condolences for a legacy you did not build." The words hit like a shove. Outward stability versus inward rot. They were defending the crown by trying to crush the neck beneath it. I stepped farther into the room. "If you want to talk about who built what," I said, voice low, "then maybe we should talk about how it was built." The cousin's eyes widened. My brother-in-law froze mid-step. My husband's sister inhaled sharply, as if she'd been waiting years for someone to say it. My mother-in-law didn't blink. "Careful," she warned. Loyalty versus survival. This was the line. Step over it and you might never step back. Mr. Danner raised a hand. "Let be clear," he said. "The amendment is legally valid. Contesting it could trigger the penalty clause." "We know the clause," my brother-in-law snapped. "That's the point. It's a hostage situation." "It's a deterrent," Mr. Danner corrected. My brother-in-law laughed bitterly. "It's blackmail." "It's your brother's will," Mr. Danner said. "And why do you think he wrote it like that?" my brother-in-law demanded, turning back to me. "Because she fed him paranoia, because she wanted leverage." I felt anger flare hot, but underneath it was something colder, fear that he might be right about one thing. My husband had planned. He'd curated. He'd moved pieces. But there was a difference between being a piece and being a pawn. I reached into my purse and pulled out the old photo album, setting it on the table with a dull thud. Everyone's eyes dropped to it. "I went to the bank," I said. My mother-in-law's face tightened. "You had no right." "I'm his wife," I answered. "According to all of you, that title matters until it doesn't." My husband's sister stepped forward, gaze fixed on the album. "What is that?" she asked quietly. "A record," I said, "of what you keep pretending never happened." My mother-in-law moved toward the table like a predator. "You will not." My brother-in-law slapped his hand down on the album, covering it. "Don't!" he hissed, not at me, but at his mother. "Not here." The moment was small, but it told me everything. The brother wasn't afraid of lies. He was afraid of exposure. My mother-in-law's eyes flashed. "This is family," she said. "We handle family matters privately." "That's what you always say," my husband's sister shot back. "And it always means shut up." The room erupted. Voices overlapped, sharp and desperate. Cousins murmured about scandal, about media, about the board. My brother-in-law paced, swearing under his breath. My mother-in-law demanded control. My husband's sister demanded truth. Mr. Danner tried to speak and was ignored. Betrayal had a chorus, and everyone sang their own version of the song. "He was sick," my brother-in-law insisted. "He didn't know what he was doing." "He knew exactly," my husband's sister snapped. "He put a clause in there like a bomb. That's not confusion." "You don't understand," my mother-in-law said, voice rising for the first time. "You don't understand what's at stake. The employees, the community. This isn't just about us." "It's always about you," the sister said, tears spilling now. "It's always about how you look." The cousins began choosing sides with their silence, some leaning toward my mother-in-law, drawn by fear of losing access. Others leaning toward the sister, drawn by the thrill of moral righteousness when it doesn't cost them anything. And me, I stood in the middle, holding nothing but my own breath. "Tell us what you found," my brother-in-law demanded again. "Tell us what you're hiding." I looked at their faces, one by one. Outrage, fear, entitlement, grief twisted into greed. I saw how quickly they could turn grief into accusation, love into a weapon, family into a cage. Then I thought of her voice on the phone. "You're not safe in that house." I thought of the missing photo, the torn caption, the letter marked for her. And I realized my choice wasn't between keeping the family together and breaking it apart. My choice was between protecting a lie that had already killed people and telling a truth that might get me destroyed. Before I could speak, Mr. Danner's phone vibrated on the table. He glanced down, and something in his expression shifted, professional neutrality cracking into urgency. "Everyone," he said sharply, "stop." No one stopped until he stood. "I just received notice," he said, voice tight. "A legal filing has been initiated." The room went still, the kind of stillness that happens right before something breaks. "By who?" my mother-in-law demanded. Mr. Danner looked at me, then at them. "By the conditional beneficiary," he said. "She's contesting the estate for more than the amendment." And in that instant, the fight in the room stopped being emotional. It became real-world danger. Collapse doesn't always look like screaming and shattered glass. Sometimes it looks like an email. The morning after Mr. Danner announced the filing, my phone began buzzing before sunrise, messages from numbers I recognized and numbers I didn't. The first was from the company's finance director, careful and panicked at once. "Accounts temporarily frozen pending review. Please advise." Frozen. The word made my skin go cold. It didn't matter that I'd never touched those accounts. In the eyes of a system built on paperwork, my name being tied to the estate made me a liability. The second message came from a reporter I'd met once at a charity gala. She didn't offer condolences. She offered a question. "Heard there may be a dispute over the Hale estate. Any comment?" By 8 o'clock, the dispute was no longer family. It was a headline trying to be born. Security versus ruin. That contrast stopped being a theme and became my morning. In the kitchen, staff moved quietly, refusing to meet my eyes. In the hallway, my mother-in-law's footsteps were sharp. Purposeful, she was already on the phone with someone, voice clipped, speaking in the language of damage control. My brother-in-law paced with his coffee untouched, jaw working like he was chewing through rage. My husband's sister didn't come down at all. When I tried to call her, it went to voicemail. Relationship snapping. Not in dramatic declarations, but in the sudden absence of warmth, the way doors shut softly and stayed shut. At 10, Mr. Danner arrived again, face tight, folder thicker. "We need to discuss strategy," he said. as if strategy was something you could apply to grief like a bandage. We gathered in the study, our war room, only now it didn't feel like a room. It felt like a shrinking cage. Mr. Danner placed documents on the table. "The filing alleges wrongful exclusion," he said. "Fraud, undue influence, and," his eyes flicked to my mother-in-law, "potential criminal concealment." My mother-in-law didn't flinch. "Allegations are just words," she said. "Words become court dates," Mr. Danner replied, "and court dates become discovery." Discovery. The word landed like a threat, because discovery meant the family's locked drawers might be opened by someone who didn't care about their reputation. My brother-in-law slammed his hand on the table. "This is because of her," he snapped, pointing at me again like I was the spark, not the fuel. "She's stirring it up, she's—" "Enough," Mr. Danner cut in. "Blame won't solve this." But blame was the family's favorite solution. It kept the real rot protected. "What do we do?" my mother-in-law asked, and for the first time her voice carried something raw beneath the control. Fear. Mr. Danner exhaled. "There are 3 paths," he said. 1, settle privately. Pay her, expand the terms, enforce confidentiality. 2, fight. Contest her claims, challenge the narrative, attempt to preserve the core holdings. 3, disclose, cooperate fully, accept whatever comes. His eyes came to me. "And because Mrs. Hale is named as facilitator in the amendment, and because she was the final witness to your husband's intentions, her role is central." Central, a polite word for trapped. My mother-in-law's gaze sharpened. "She will do what's best for this family." The sentence tried to wrap around my throat like a leash. I looked at the portrait on the wall, my father-in-law's painted smile, and thought about what I'd found behind it, what I'd read in the bank box. The accident folder, my husband's signature. The torn photo caption, "At the barn with L." What's best for this family had already killed someone. I heard my husband's last request again, split into jagged pieces. "Wait. Give it to her first. Burn it if you must." He hadn't asked me to save the family. He asked me to survive it. And now survival came with choices that tasted like betrayal, no matter which way I turned. I excused myself and went upstairs, locking the bedroom door behind me. My hands shook as I emptied my purse onto the bed. The key, the USB, the sealed envelope marked "for her." I stared at them like they were a jury. Then I opened my husband's letter, the one addressed to me. My name looked too gentle in his handwriting, as if he still believed love could soften what he'd done. The pages inside were filled with tight lines, the ink slightly smudged in places. He didn't start with "I'm sorry." He started with instruction. "If you're reading this, they've already turned on you." My stomach twisted. He wrote about the family's instinct to protect the name. He wrote that his brother would blame me because blaming me was easier than facing his father. He wrote that his mother would call it loyalty, but it was fear. He wrote that the conditional beneficiary would not stop at the amendment because the amendment was a compromise, not justice. Then the sentence that made my breath catch. "I didn't tell you everything." My fingers went numb. He admitted he'd signed documents years ago because he wanted his father's approval. He admitted he'd let threats happen. He admitted he'd convinced himself silence was protection. And then he wrote something that didn't feel like confession. It felt like a final shove. "If you tell the whole truth, you'll burn. If you tell none, you'll rot. You must decide what kind of pain you can live with." There it was, the moral trap, sharpened and handed to me like a knife with my fingerprints already on the handle. I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to breathe. Outside, the house was moving, phones ringing, doors closing, whispers traveling. I could almost feel the family's narrative tightening, being rewritten around me. Grieving widow becomes unstable widow becomes manipulative widow becomes enemy. If they made me the villain, the public would believe it. People loved a story where a legacy family was victimized by an outsider. It was cleaner than the truth. I took out the USB. My husband's note echoed. "If they come for you, play this first." I plugged it into my laptop with hands that trembled. A video file opened, grainy footage, shot from a phone. My husband's face filled the screen, alive but haunted, eyes rimmed red. He looked like a man recording himself before he lost the nerve. "If you're watching this," he said, voice rough, "then I'm gone and the family is doing what it does." He named names, not vaguely, specifically. He said what his father had done. He said the will was forged. He said the original deed existed. He said the accident wasn't handled privately out of compassion but out of fear. He admitted his own complicity, years of silence, the signature, the cowardice. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. "They will try to destroy my wife to protect themselves. Don't let them. She didn't know. I used her because I was too weak to face them while I was alive." Used, the word sat in my chest like a stone. Weakness versus strength flipped inside me, slow and unmistakable. I had been reacting for days, flinching, hiding, surviving minute to minute. But hearing him say it out loud, watching his living eyes confess what his dead hands had forced onto mine, something in me steadied. He had used me, yes, but he had also given me the one thing the family couldn't manufacture, a documented truth with his face attached. I closed the laptop and stared at the ceiling, heart pounding. Now the options were real. Reveal everything publicly. Release the video, drop the documents into daylight, let the world do what the world does. Truth as wildfire, cleansing but uncontrollable. Negotiate privately. Use the evidence to force a settlement with the conditional beneficiary. Keep the worst details sealed. Protect the innocent. Employees, children, people who would be collateral damage. Or expose only part. Enough to protect myself and her, not enough to collapse the entire legacy. A truth rationed like medicine. Integrity versus pragmatism. Justice versus mercy. Survival versus conscience. I thought about the erased daughter, her voice on the phone, tired and certain. I thought about my husband's sister, furious and hurting. I thought about the employees whose livelihoods hung on the company's stability. I thought about the dead woman by the barn, whose story had been swallowed by a family that called it private. Then I stood up. Not because I felt brave, because I was done being moved. I gathered the evidence into a folder of my own. The video file, the deed copy, the accident folder copy, the photos, the letter. I made backups, multiple, because if this family had taught me anything, it was that paper disappears when it threatens power. I went downstairs and walked into the study without asking permission, without waiting for a pause in conversation. My mother-in-law stopped mid-sentence. My brother-in-law's head snapped up. Mr. Danner's eyes widened slightly. I set my folder on the table. "I'm not your scapegoat," I said. My voice didn't shake. That surprised me most. My mother-in-law's face hardened. "You're emotional," she said, as if emotion disqualified truth. "No," I replied. "I'm awake." My brother-in-law stood. "What is that?" "A boundary," I said, "and a choice." Mr. Danner leaned forward. "Mrs. Hale." "I'm meeting her," I said, and watched their faces shift at the word her. "The conditional beneficiary today, in public, with counsel present." My mother-in-law's eyes flashed. "You will not." "I will," I cut in. "And after I hear her version, I will decide what gets revealed, what gets negotiated, and what gets buried. Not you." The room went quiet, but it wasn't the quiet of agreement. It was the quiet of people realizing control was slipping. My brother-in-law's mouth curled. "You think you're in charge," he sneered. I looked at him, really looked at him, at the entitlement in his grief, the hunger behind his outrage. "I think the truth is," I said. And as I walked out, keys in my pocket, evidence in my hands, I understood the next step clearly. The legacy was about to be rewritten. By truth or by force. Resolution, a different kind of legacy, 1,050 words. The day the legacy finally cracked, it didn't sound like thunder. It sounded like a pen scratching across paper. We met in a conference room that smelled like stale coffee and expensive restraint. Glass walls, neutral art, a table wide enough to keep people from touching, built for negotiations where truth is treated like a dangerous substance. Mr. Danner sat to my left, my folder of evidence in front of me. Across the table sat her, Lena, along with her attorney, a woman with calm eyes and a voice like steel wrapped in velvet. Lena didn't look like the villain my in-laws had described in their whispers. She looked tired, not sleepy tired, life tired. The kind of tired that comes from spending years knocking on a door that never opens. She met my eyes first, not my lawyer's. "You brought it," she said quietly, nodding toward my folder. "I did," I answered. "But I need you to tell me what you know, not what my husband said, what you know." Her jaw tightened. "Your husband told you he found me," she said. "He told you he tried to fix it." I didn't answer. I let the silence confirm what she already suspected. Lena leaned forward, palms flat. "He didn't find me," she said. "I found him." My stomach clenched. "I was 29 when I learned the truth," she continued. "Not the full truth, just enough to recognize my own life had been edited. My mother died when I was a child. I was told it was an accident. I was told to be grateful someone took me in. I spent my whole life feeling like a guest in my own story." Her eyes shone, but her voice stayed steady. "Then I found old letters, names, an address. And when I started asking questions, people started warning me to stop. Danger versus survival. My husband had warned me about threats like they were theoretical. Hearing them from her made them sharp. My mother didn't fall," Lena said. "She was pushed." The word hit the room like a slammed door. Mr. Danner's expression tightened. Her attorney didn't blink, as if she'd heard it before. I swallowed. "I saw an accident file," I admitted. "It said fall, it said handled privately." Lena's laugh was small and bitter. "Handled privately," she repeated. "That's what they call it when they bury it." She reached into her bag and slid a thin folder across the table. "This is what I have," she said. Inside were copies of police notes, informal, old, half-finished. A witness statement that had been withdrawn. A medical report with a margin note that made my skin crawl, inconsistencies. I felt my chest tighten as the pieces clicked into a shape I didn't want to see. My husband hadn't lied about everything, but he had framed it. He had crafted a story where his father was the monster and he was the regretful son. A story where his deathbed confession could make him brave without having to live brave. Lena watched me, reading my face. "He tried to give you the role of hero," she said, "but he was still protecting himself." I exhaled slowly. Integrity versus loyalty. The truth demanded I stop protecting the dead just because they were mine. "I have something too," I said. My fingers trembled as I slid my own folder forward and opened it to the USB drive's transcript. My husband's recorded confession. Lena didn't grab it. She stared at it like it might bite. "He admitted complicity," I said. "He said he used me. He named names." Lena's throat worked as she swallowed. "He never gave me that," she whispered. "He never gave me his voice." Because he wanted to control who got hurt, I thought, even in confession. Her attorney leaned forward. "If that recording is authenticated, it changes everything," she said. "Criminal exposure, civil exposure, the trust becomes the least of it." Mr. Danner's face tightened. "And it would destroy the company," he said, voice low. "Employees, contracts, the community." "Don't," I interrupted. My voice surprised even me. "Don't use innocent people as a shield for guilty ones." Greed versus integrity. For years, the family had wrapped greed in the language of responsibility. It sounded noble until you looked closer. Lena's eyes stayed on mine. "So what do you want?" she asked. "Because I'm done being paid to stay quiet." The room held its breath. I thought about my husband's sister, how she demanded truth with tears in her eyes. I thought about my mother-in-law's face when the name was read aloud, shock, then calculation. I thought about the barn, the torn photo, the letter L. And I thought about myself, how easy it would be to choose the cleanest ending for me. Settle quietly, keep my portion, let the family carry on, let Lena take money instead of justice. It would be comfort. It would also be cowardice wearing perfume. "I want accountability," I said. "But I also want to protect the people who didn't choose this, employees, kids, anyone who will get crushed under the headlines. Lena's eyes narrowed. And what does that look like? It looks like a line, I said, and tapped the table lightly. A legal settlement that makes you whole, not silent. A public statement that acknowledges you, by name, without turning your life into spectacle. And a formal referral to the proper authorities regarding your mother's death. No more handled privately. Mr. Danner's face went pale. Mrs. Hale. I'm not asking, I said. I'm done negotiating with fear. Weakness versus strength flipped fully inside me then. Not because I felt powerful, but because I finally understood what power was supposed to be for. Protection, not control. Lena stared at me for a long time. Then her shoulders sagged, and I saw the smallest crack in her armor. My whole life, she said, voice quieter. I thought I was crazy for feeling like something was missing. I just want the story to be true. I nodded, throat tight. So do I whispered. The agreement took hours. Lawyers argued clauses, numbers were adjusted. Language was sharpened, but the turning point wasn't legal. It was human. At the end, Lena signed with a hand that barely shook. I signed with a hand that did. When it was done, she looked at me and said, "Thank you for not making me beg." "I'm sorry you ever had to," I replied. When I returned to the house, the family was waiting. Not in the study this time, too symbolic, too close to the portrait and its hidden compartment. They waited in the formal living room where the furniture was arranged like a museum, where no one ever truly relaxed. My mother-in-law sat upright. My brother-in-law stood behind her like a guard dog. My husband's sister sat apart, eyes red, hands clenched. They all looked at me like I was a verdict walking in. I didn't sit. "I met her," I said. My mother-in-law's jaw tightened. And she's family," I said, letting the word land like truth, not permission. "Whether you like it or not." My brother-in-law took a step forward, anger flaring. "You sold us out." "No," I said. "I stopped you from selling everyone else out." I told them what I'd decided, what would be acknowledged publicly, what would be settled, what would be referred to authorities. I didn't show them the video. I didn't need to. The fact that I had it was enough. My mother-in-law's face hardened into marble. "You're destroying everything," she whispered. I looked at her, really looked, and felt something strange. Pity. "You destroyed it," I said softly. "I'm just refusing to carry it." My husband's sister began to cry, not loud, not dramatic, quiet tears like relief. She covered her mouth, shaking her head. "Finally," she whispered. My brother-in-law's eyes burned with hate, but beneath it was fear, because the old rules no longer worked on me. And in that moment, the legacy shifted. Not the land, not the names, not the money. The legacy became something else, the courage to stop pretending. I left the house before midnight. I packed only what was mine, clothes, photos of my own family, a few books, the things that didn't belong to their story. I didn't take the portrait. I didn't take their silver. I didn't take the weight. As I drove away, the hilltop house shrank behind me, lights glowing like a stage after the audience has gone home. For years, I'd believed legacy meant staying, enduring, protecting. Now I understood legacy differently. Legacy is what survives when the story collapses. Accountability, protection, the refusal to let the vulnerable be erased. I don't know how much money I'll walk away with when everything is finalized. Maybe less than I thought. Maybe nothing that looks impressive on paper. But I know what I'm walking away with that matters more. Freedom. And a peace that finally feels like truth.